Welcome back to Danielle O'Terry's Italy. Next month, a new film version of the Odyssey is coming out. It's a big deal. It's been shot over many years, specifically for IMAX. It's directed by Christopher Nolan, and it has all A-list celebrities starring. Big movies like this aren't frequently made anymore, but if you're going to go big, the Odyssey is an excellent choice. It almost feels like the origin story of the West. It's like a secular Garden of Eden. And it is, in a way, because it is the hero's journey that was so well studied and outlined by scholar Joseph Campbell. And it's the foundation of so many stories, including the ones that we tell about ourselves. And if we're talking about story structure, you can draw a direct line between the Odyssey and Star Wars. But I believe there's another reason the Odyssey is so easy to refresh. Because it comes from a world that was rebuilding itself. The Odyssey was part of a renaissance. A new world born after something called the Bronze Age collapse. That was a catastrophic unraveling that happened within just a few decades around the year 1200 BCE. And it ushered in nearly 400 years of darkness. This was a time when powerful Mediterranean civilizations fell within a few decades. These societies, with their literatures, crafts, and resources that made them distinct, were also deeply interconnected through trade. Now, if we look at the list of cities that collapsed on the modern-day map, it's quite stunning. It includes Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Iraq, and Iran. Scholars have been trying to understand this period for generations because something so bad happened that even writing disappeared, at least in Greece. This was the Mycenaean script called Linear B, and it seems to have vanished completely, along with the palace system that had sustained it. And so much of the work of historians is evaluating what was written. The work of archaeologists is more about studying the stuff, what was found. But now, archaeobotanists and climate scientists have been able to get us much closer to unraveling the mystery. And through pollen cores, lake sediments, and tree ring studies, they've been able to determine that there was a devastating drought, and evidence suggests that it lasted for well over a century. That caused crop failures severe enough to destabilize the entire system. Famine and disease naturally followed, and then throw on top of that a series of devastating earthquakes. The surviving tablets describe sea peoples, invaders, particularly in the Canaanite lands, which are today Ashkelon and Gaza. The sea peoples took over and became the Philistines. And they may have behaved like invading armies, but now that we understand the drought and the earthquakes, these sea people were almost certainly climate refugees, traveling to wherever there was food, water, and stable ground. Writing was lost, innovation halted, and Homer's Odyssey, which arose from oral storytelling, is part of the rebirth that followed. Much of Odysseus' journey is not in what we call Greece today, but in Italy. And the Odyssey seems to coincide with the westward expansion of Greek colonists into Italy. If you visit Ischia, the subject of my most recent destination deep dive, which you can access at danielleoterry.com, you can visit the Nestor Cup. It's a small drinking vessel with a joke inscribed on it referencing Homer's other great poem, the Iliad, and it contains some of the earliest written Greek characters from this period. Ischia was the very first place that Greek colonists from Euboea settled, and they called it Pithecusa. And fittingly, the Archaeological Museum, where you can see the Nestor Cup, is in the former home of famed book publisher Angelo Rizzoli, who first colonized Ischia with hotels and started the island's modern tourism industry. Homer, or the tradition that Homer represents, we're not even sure he was real, took generations of coastal fishermen's and traders' accumulated knowledge, their warnings, the near misses, the lore of the route that they took, and he elevated it into heroic narrative. The Odyssey makes a chart of southern Italy, the beginning of what is now called the Ulysses Coast or the Ulysses Riviera in Lazio. Ulysses, by the way, is the Roman name for Odysseus, and that can get kind of confusing. The Emperor Tiberius, Roman, had a seaside villa decorated with massive sculptures depicting scenes from the Odyssey. The monsters and creatures, especially the Sirens and the Scilla, are personifications of natural phenomena, which means the Odyssey also captures the lore of sailors from the period. I like to think of the Odyssey as the earliest travelogue of southern Italy. So that's why I invited Laura Itzkowitz to join this conversation. She's a travel writer based in Rome and writes the New Roman Times, which, like this podcast and newsletter, is hosted on Substack.
I am Laura Itzkowitz. I'm a freelance journalist based in Rome, and I cover travel in general, but especially Italy for publications like Travel and Leisure, Condé Nast Traveler, Afar, Architectural Digest, Food and Wine. I am also a contributing editor at Italy Magazine, and I typically update the Foder's Rome guidebook every year. I also write a Substack called the New Roman Times, which I send out every Thursday, and that's all about people, places, and things that matter to Romans and anyone who loves Rome. So I kind of take a wide lens on Rome, on travel through Italy, but in particular, I'm always looking for those under the radar places that my Roman friends would go to. And I love the history and the mythology behind it all.
What kind of pieces are the readers of your Substack most gravitating toward these days?
Not gonna lie, I have to say it's a lot of the lists.
The list, okay.
Yeah, because I publish, like, my curated lists, I call them, so they're, my list of, my favorite restaurants in Rome or favorite beach towns, rooftop bars, that kind of thing. I mean, people are definitely looking for that, and they come to me when they're planning a trip.
To me right now, the value of Substack is that you can kind of vet the person who's writing it. They have a certain level of accountability to their readers that I think is different than what you find on TikTok or Instagram, which is more dictated by the algorithm, and creators really need to move with the algorithm. But
Yes.
Substack allows readers to form a relationship with the writer or at least kind of suss out the trust level that they can apply.
Yes, for sure. And I think it's also different than like, I sort of almost wear different hats when I write for a publication like Condé Nast Traveler versus when I'm writing for my own Substack. Because I do work on those lists sometimes for mainstream publications. And something that I feel strongly about in my own Substack is, I label my lists as very subjective lists because, I mean, every list is inherently subjective. It's just that people tend to forget that. So they might take, Condé Nast Traveler's List as gospel, but, like, actually, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes there, which you, I'm sure, know all about.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And yeah, some people do get upset and they're like, "That's not the best." And it's like, "Well, that's what I think is the best right now."
That's why I like to call it out and say, like, "This is my list." Like, it's a very subjective list.
We met in Rome last I think it was about a year ago now, and you also said that you're a history geek and you appreciate history, and of course, there's no better city in the world to live in than Rome if you're a history geek. And The Odyssey, the movie directed by Christopher Nolan, which has been getting a lot of press, is coming out very, very soon. I've been seeing stuff about it for, I wanna say 2 years. They've been filming in Sicily, elsewhere around the Mediterranean as well, and the Odyssey and the Aeneid, both these epics of Greek poetry, figure significantly into Italy's history. And there are actual locations that you can visit from this epic poem from many thousands of years ago. And some of them are more well known, like Capri, and then some of them less so. So you have been to some of the less famous sites, and that's what I would love to hear more about.
You're right, I am total history geek. I think I've been fascinated by the ancient mythology, like, as long as I can remember. My dad used to read me bedtime stories about ancient Greek and Roman myths, and I went to a classical high school in Boston.
Oh, wow.
So, it was a tiny little private high school where I was in a class of, like, 25 students. We read the Odyssey. This kind of imprinting has had a very big sort of influence on my, education, upbringing, and outlook, and what I just am fascinated by and what I love to investigate more when I'm traveling around Italy.
Oh, that's so interesting that you have that background. It's much more common in Italy. There's what's called Liceo Classico, and
Mhm.
it's kind of generally the smart kids that can go to a Liceo Classico, but it's totally public as and the
Mhm.
more mainstream is Liceo Scientifico. But yes, at Liceo Classico, you studied Latin and Greek and all the grammar and declensions. It's not easy, but it is really the foundation of a very formal education. So I think that's fantastic that you've had that experience. So what do you remember about studying the Odyssey in high school?
I've gone back to it a little bit in recent years, so I read, for example, Circe by Madeline Miller, which I don't know if you read, but this is a fantastic book retelling the story of Circe or Circe, as they would say in Italian, who was the sorceress that enchanted Odysseus and turned his sailors and soldiers into swine on a mythical island, which was very likely right here in Lazio, not too far from Rome.
Let's start with that, with Monte Circeo. Is that how it's
Mhm.
said? Yeah.
Yes, Monte Circeo, exactly.
Tell us about that.
It's a beautiful place, first of all. And what I love about this part of Lazio is that it really feels like under the radar. So there is a lot of, let's say, domestic tourism because a lot of Romans go down to this part of the coast in the summer, but there's really not much international travel at all. So I have been going to various towns on the coast because there are several, and the whole coast is called the Riviera di Ulisse. So the Riviera of Ulysses, and it's made up by this string of towns. So there's Monte Circeo, which is a very large mountain that kind of looms over this part of the coast. And that mountain basically overlooks, on one side there's Sabaudia, which is this kind of like has these very chic, old school, very like retro beach clubs. And then on the other side, there's San Felice Circeo, which is another kind of like classic old Lazio beach town where a lot of Romans, the more well to do Romans have their like summer house. There's Sperlonga, which is probably one of the more well known ones. And there, again, amazing, beautiful gold sand beaches, and the Villa of Tiberius. There's Terracina, which is another fascinating town where there's like beautiful beaches, like miles of beaches, and then there's the upper town and the lower town, and the beaches are on the lower town, and then in the upper town there is the old, like, medieval quarter, part of which you can see actually does date back to ancient Rome, and there's a piece of the Appia Antica and a Roman theater, like, right in the center of town. And then there's Gaeta, which is a little bit scruffier, I would say. I love it because I love that it has this, like, kind of contrast between the old medieval quarter where it's like, those really faded weathered buildings where people still hang their laundry out in the streets to dry. And, you see the little shrines to the Madonna, and like little bakeries and things making the local specialty. And then there are these beaches that are like almost hidden. You can't even necessarily see them from the road because the road is up high and then you descend down to the beaches, which are beautiful golden sand beaches and super clean water. So going there now, obviously things are built up and changed, but like you can almost imagine that this could have been a sort of like beautiful, mythical, beachy, coastal Mediterranean paradise for a sailor that washes up on his ship, after years at sea.
The interesting thing too, I like about the area around Gaeta, where the region of Lazio comes close to Campania. Part of what is now Lazio used to be part of Campania, and if you are somebody who spends a lot of time in the South has Italian American heritage from around Naples, you feel it. The accent sounds more Neapolitan there. Like you said, you
Mhm.
start to see the laundry and the Madonnas. That's when you know you're entering the South. So, the Odyssey, of course, being an epic Greek poem, really helps, I think, people understand, and this is something I will contextualize for my clients, the difference between Southern Italy, Central, and North, which is Southern Italy is firmly part of the Mediterranean world. And that's
Mhm.
most obvious when you get to Naples. It's just a city that has more in common with Athens than it has with Florence. But yeah, I think that transition there on the Ulysses Coast around Gaeta is where you really feel yourself moving into the Mediterranean world. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And if you think about it back then, I mean, I don't know exactly where the, like, border was, but a lot of that part of Campania and further south was Magna Graecia, right? It was a Greek colony, so including Ischia, right? Including Naples, right?
Absolutely. It was all part of, yeah, the greater
Neapolis.
Greece, yeah. It is the Greek world, and you feel it, I mean, thousands of years later, there's something there where it's like, "Yep, we're moving into a different territory."
I ended up on this cruise last year, which was kind of fascinating. It was a small cruise ship by Windstar, and it was a mystery cruise. So the funny thing about it was, okay, you we all boarded the ship in Athens and had no idea where we were going, but basically received clues every morning about our next destination. And a lot of the clues were tied to the Odyssey or to the Greek mythology. And as the voyage progressed, we realized that they had carefully planned this itinerary to take us into Magna Graecia, basically. So the ship sailed from Athens and then made stops in Sicily, Calabria, including Scilla, which is how I visited the town named for the monster in the Odyssey, and then Puglia, Sicily, Calabria, Taranto.
Oh, wow, amazing. If people wanna visit Monte Circeo, maybe they wanna just take a day trip to Rome, is that possible? What would you recommend?
I would recommend at least spending a night or 2 because, first of all, it's doable as a day trip if you really want to. It's probably like an hour and a half to 2 hours from Rome by car, again, depending on traffic, and in the summer, the traffic can be quite intense on the coast. So, when my husband and I go down to that area, we usually like to stay overnight, 1 or 2 nights, and that way you get a little bit more time to spend. We typically will arrive like in the afternoon, check into our accommodation, maybe go to the beach if it's still, not too late, or else just take a walk around the town wherever we're staying. And as I mentioned, these are really like charming, lovely towns. Sperlonga, for example, you walk around the Centro Storico of Sperlonga and it's completely whitewashed walls. There's like the central piazza where everyone goes to have an aperitivo in the evening, lined by these like little maze of streets where there are, shops and bars and restaurants, and it does feel almost like Greece. Like it has that same kind of whitewashed quality that you see in the Greek islands. So that's really nice. And then if you love the beach, you wanna spend some time at the beach, these are fabulous beaches. That's what we usually do when we go in the summer. Just, like, pick a beach club and hang out for the day with a good book and have a nice long lunch.
And I like what you had mentioned before about sort of these old school beach clubs that
Mhm.
Romans go to. We don't have beach club culture in the US despite all of our beautiful shoreline on both the East and the West Coast, but we should because I think beach clubs are just so freaking civilized. It's such a wonderful experience to just have everything that you need there contained and people bringing you food and drink if you should desire. Any particular beach clubs that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I love them. I think the beach clubs and the beach culture is like one of my favorite things about Italy. And I was not a beach person growing up in the US at all. Even like though I lived in the Boston area, could have gone to the Cape, but like I did not grow up going to the Cape. I became a beach person after I moved to Italy and started to get used to this very convenient, very nice beach club culture, as you mentioned. And I love the places that are not fancy, right? Like, not the expensive places in Capri, but like, okay, well, I one that I'm going to recommend is on the expensive side by Italian standards, but, Saporetti in Sabaudia, I would say, is just, like, sort of the ideal. Like, for me, it's that dreamy, like, very retro style. I mean, retro style, like, but not, in a put on way. Like, it literally just has been around for generations, and it still looks the same way that it did in probably the 1940s and 50s.
That
So,
sounds fun.
the kind of like almost like a beach shack, right? With the wooden paneled walls and, the tables inside and outside overlooking the beach, and just all the classic, spaghetti alle vongole or, with mixed seafood and the fritto misto and like the nice crisp wine. And then all of the loungers and umbrellas spread out below on the beach. I mean, that is like ideal. And then let's see, in Sperlonga, I just went to one a couple of weeks ago that was really great. So I stayed in a little hotel on one end of the beach called La Nave, and that again was like a little family run place that's been around since I think at least the 60s, if not before. And again, super like retro looking. I was fascinated by the walls where they had all these, like, seashells just, like, in the walls, in the mason like, in the plaster, basically. They had, like, stuck all these seashells into the walls, and that's right on the beach, so if you're staying at the hotel as a guest, I mean, it was, like, 180 euros for a night, so perhaps a little bit expensive by Italian standards, but, like, not I would say not crazy by American standards at all. Go spend a night, and the use of the beach club with the loungers and umbrellas is included, so we
Good
hung
deal.
out at their beach club exactly, and, they have we didn't have a meal at, like, their formal restaurant, we just grabbed sandwiches at, like, the little bar right at the beach, but, I mean, that was lovely and very chill, and then the next day we went to a different beach club called Bazzano Beach, which was on the other end of Sperlonga, closer to the Villa of Tiberius, and that was great.
About Sperlonga, of course, is that archaeological museum. There's a huge sculpture that was found in a million pieces, and art historians and archaeologists have been trying to reassemble it forever. I got very fascinated by it when I was taking a Roman art class in graduate school. And because of its location as well, I told my professor that I wanted to do some additional research on it. And she told me, don't do that. You're crazy because people have been trying to put this thing back together for 5 or 6 decades unsuccessfully. So you might want to pick a project that has a better outcome a better likelihood of success. But nonetheless, I just love that you can go have this glamorous Roman holiday and also visit an archaeological museum. There's nothing more Italian than that, in my opinion.
Yes.
Let's talk about Scilla, which is one of these gems of Calabria. Calabria can be a difficult place to visit, though there are so many wonderful places there. And Calabria and Abruzzo, I would say, are two places in particular where you find just the best food and where food tastes like it did in Italy 20 years ago. I mean, Italian food, of course, is wonderful, but it has changed a lot. There's a lot more modern spins on things, but when I taste food in Calabria or Abruzzo, that's when it's like, "Oh, my grandmother's cooking is very much alive." So I do advocate for people to go to Calabria even though it can be tricky, but Sheila is not tricky. Sheila is historic and mythically beautiful and interesting, so I would love to hear more about your experience there.
Yeah, I mean, it was really beautiful, and I wish that I could have spent more time there. It was a shore excursion, so obviously we only had a few hours, and they had actually paired it with, like, so Scilla and then Reggio Calabria we also visited. Scilla is a small town on the Calabrian coast. The name comes from the name of this mythical monster in the Odyssey, right? Which was the like multi-headed monster. It had snake's heads and it would kind of the heads would like come snatch the sailors off of Odysseus's ship or off of any sailor's ship. And yet you go there and it's this incredibly beautiful place where the sea is like the most incredible shade of turquoise that I think I've ever seen. And so we went and we did a tour of this like medieval castle that's way up on the hill. There's like a small museum inside of it that has like artifacts from ships and fishermen, that kind of stuff. And but just the most amazing views from up there because up at this castle, like on the cliff, you look down and you see this incredible coastline. We went down into the main part of the town after visiting the castle and just kind of wandered for a little bit. It does feel like that sort of Italy as it was probably in, I mean, I'm a relative newcomer, right?
Yeah, Calabria is very retro.
Very retro, very like, a real neighborhood where people are living and going about their daily business. And
They take you to the archaeological museum?
yes, we went to see the bronzes, which are unbelievable, incredible. I mean, and that, like, if you want to talk about the Greek history and mythology, I mean, those ancient Greek bronze statues, the Bronzi di Riace, are just incredible in person, like, even more than you can imagine.
I think if you're interested in the history of ancient Greece, of course, southern Italy was part of it and therefore a requisite pilgrimage place. The temples of Paestum, which are dear to my heart, are in that world. But in terms of a museum, that museum in Reggio Calabria is just astounding. And I went for the first time because of the Riace warriors, which are these beautiful bronzes that were lost in a shipwreck and then
Mhm.
retrieved by scuba divers in 1978, 77, something like that. And they are the signature of Reggio Calabria. I remember going into a McDonald's to use the bathroom, and the mirrors in the bathroom had the McDonald's arches and the Riace warriors on them. But there are so many other things in that museum that tell the history of ancient Greece in southern Italy.
I was also very impressed with the archaeological museum in Taranto, I have to say.
Mm,
Taranto as a city, I don't know if I would recommend it to most travelers because it is still rather rough around the edges.
yeah, it's a tough town.
Yeah, but that museum was also very impressive. In Sicily, we docked at Giardini Naxos and then went up into Taormina and visited the Greek theater there, which is another just unbelievable, like mind-blowingly incredible ancient historic site. Taormina obviously is much more touristy and much more crowded than Calabria and parts of Puglia for sure, but that theater, man, just being up there and, like, having those incredible panoramas of the coast, the theater with the sea just beyond is amazing.
The most famous scene of the Odyssey is, of course, Odysseus encountering the Sirens. And throughout Italy, southern Italy especially, you will find myths of sirens, different towns or villages that say one of the sirens washed up here. Now, the most famous island for this is Capri, which a lot of people argue is the point where Odysseus would have encountered the sirens, who are alternately described as either singing mermaids or birds. The most ancient iteration of the sirens are as sort of birds with human-esque heads, and they evolve into mermaids, especially in the 18th and the 19th century. And then there's also the debate that the sirens and Odysseus encountered each other in Sicily. And
I
I
think
like
that's in Ligali, right off of the coast of Positano.
and then there's the third, which is the coast of yeah, the Ligali Islands, which are right off of Positano, which are much smaller. But all throughout Campania and Cilento as well, you'll find myths of the sirens, and then they get really specific. They even name them. Near Castellabate on the Cilento coast, this is the place where they say the body of the siren Leucosia washed up. Then you go down further into Calabria, and there's a third siren there who is identified. Parthenope is the siren that's most frequently identified, and the city of Naples began as a fishing colony that was actually called Parthenope. So, even though I know a lot of historians actually make a stronger case for the siren encounter happening in Sicily, Naples was named Parthenope after a siren, so I'm sticking with Naples. And when you walk along the Lungomare in Naples, Naples, of course, is a big chaotic city with lots of graffiti and traffic and noise. But when you walk along the Lungomare and you see Capri in the distance, it is again one of those places that can only be described as mythically beautiful. Capri is a place that is extraordinarily beautiful. Nothing else needs to be said about how gorgeous it is. However, I also think it's a difficult place to travel now because it's so over touristed and also very, very expensive. But you're a guidebook writer, so you have to tackle these most popular places. So,
Yeah.
what's your take on visiting Capri these days, especially if you are a siren hunter?
Well, okay. I have to say I love Capri. I've been 3 times. I was there this spring, most recently in April, and I mean, as you said, it is just so mythically beautiful, because it's, this, like, rock just rising out of the sea, right? And You have the all the green of the gardens on it, the Augustus Gardens and these dramatic hilly mountainous landscapes, up in Anna Capri, for example, which are just stunning. So I mean, I definitely tell, my readers and people that I'm just giving advice to, like, yeah, go to Capri if you want, but don't try and do Capri as a day trip. The majority of the crowds are just coming in for the day. They're coming either off of cruise ships or just off of the ferries coming from Naples, from Ischia, from the Amalfi Coast. I mean, it's like everyone converges on Capri during the day. And then when the last ferries leave at the end of the day, the island completely empties out. And that's when the Caprese come back into town. So all of the locals, and I do know some locals that live there, and the sort of habitués, the people that have a home or that just go back to Capri every single summer, they've kind of mastered this, right? Like, you leave during the day and you spend the day either on a beach, at a beach club, or on a boat out at sea somewhere. And then in the evening, when all the day trippers leave, they come back into town. And in the summer, all the shops stay open late. Everyone is having aperitivo on the piazzetta and the little rooftop bars and places around town. And then, you kind of like have a much more civilized, relaxed experience in Capri in the evening when, the evening just unwinds. And it's also cooler then, right? Like, who wants to be trekking around in this very hilly landscape in, 90 plus degree weather in the summer? Like, that's exactly when you should be at the beach or on a boat, cooling off in the sea, and then come back onto the island for the evening and have a nice, like, leisurely evening with your aperitivo dinner or maybe some shopping. And there are some traditional shops still in Capri. I mean, a lot of it is the designer stores on Via Camarelle and all of that. But like when I was in Capri in April, for example, I sought out I had heard about this place called Farella, which is a little family-run shop run by women entirely. So it's like 2 generations, mother, daughter, and then cousins. And they are still making knitwear like right there in the back of their shop. They also have a
Hmm.
separate like laboratory where they have looms. And Simona Farella actually brought me to see their laboratory because I just popped into the shop and was like, "Hey, I'm a journalist, like, I heard about your shop and I'm curious to learn more," and, like, you can actually peek into the back of the shop and already see where they're doing some of the weaving, and then she was like, "Well, we have another laboratory, if you want, I'll show you." And so she just led me over there a few blocks away, and they have these, beautiful old looms where they're still weaving all the beautiful, like, sweaters and wraps that, you wanna be wearing in the evenings when it cools down.
And that's so Greek too, to have looms that are still
Mhm.
active. That sounds so mythical as well, I love that.
Yes.
I have to look for that. I recommend to people for Capri, if you're gonna go in high season, spend a lot of money and stay in a nice hotel so that you can just chill in a hammock and poolside during the day when all the day trippers are day tripping, and then enjoy the evenings, or go in the off season. I mean, April, it's getting busier in April, but that's definitely a good time to go. I have been to Capri in February, and it's a dream. A lot of the shops are closed. You're not really going swimming at that time of year, but swimming in Capri, I'm not a strong swimmer. It's all rocks. You have to be able to jump off of rocks
Mhm.
into the sea, so that's not something I'm that comfortable with anyway. I need those golden sand beaches of Sperlonga to swim, but it is so extremely beautiful, and there's some amazing hikes in Capri. It is just a chunk of rock that broke off of the Amalfi Coast. There are no actual aquifers even on Capri because it is just a chunk of rock. It's so different from Ischia, which is right next to it, which has a
Mhm.
completely different geography and natural landscape. And you want to read mythology when you're in a place that looks and feels like that because it feels like another world, and it feels like an ancient planet that still exists. That might sound like an awkward description, but that's how I feel. It's the same way I feel when I see the temples at Paestum. I feel like they're spaceships from the past that just landed, and it's very clear that this is another world to explore.
Well, and it was beloved by Augustus and Tiberius, right? I mean, I also visited the archaeological museum in Capri when I was there this spring. And, it's inside of the Certosa di San Giacomo. So beautiful charter house. And then within it, there's the archaeological museum where they have ancient finds. They have, a big bust of Augustus in there and a lot of like text also that I was reading because I'm super interested in it and just thought it was fascinating. Augustus fell in love with Capri's beauty and traded Ischia for it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was like, I guess, had possession of Ischia and he traded it for Capri because Capri is just so bewitchingly beautiful. And then Tiberius, of course, moved basically his court to Capri and like ruled from Capri in the last part of his life. And there's a lot of like myth and lore surrounding that and the perhaps salacious, unsavory things he may have done on the island.
Yeah. Well, and his nephew Caligula visiting to use the villa.
Mhm.
Lots of stories about that too. Ischia, the volcanic activity on Ischia was pretty intense at that time period. There's not a lot of Roman material on Ischia because there was just too much volcanic activity for there to be much inhabitation. But people were staying at Baia at that time, which is close to Ischia, west of Naples, and that has also that volcanic activity and hot springs. But that was kind of like the popular spot. That was the Miami Beach of the Roman world. So Tiberius was close to that scene, but on his own island. Are there any other sites that we didn't discuss?
There are the Aeolian Islands. I saw a couple of them last year on a day trip because I was scouting on assignment based in Messina. And so I went with my friend and we took like a little day trip we drove up to Milazzo and then got on one of the boats. There are some boats from well, most, not all, but a lot of the boats that go to the Aeolians leave from the port of Milazzo. And so there are some like normal ferries, and then there are these boats that basically like go kind of island hopping. I was really torn because I desperately want to see the Aeolians. I did not want to do it on a day trip. I know that those islands need a lot more time because there are 7 of them, I believe, and they're all unique. But that is where the god Aeolus lived in the Odyssey. He was the god of the winds and makes a lot of sense because it can get very windy around there.
But now you start, if you start to think about it, maybe Odysseus was just writing this amazing travelogue, not a epic heroic adventure. I mean, maybe his editor said, "You know what? You're going to need to put more adventure into this story to sell it." But really, it is a chart of some of the most beautiful places in the world.
It is some of the most beautiful places in Italy. I mean, but another thing that fascinates me about it and about all these stories and myths, also the myth of Scilla and Charybdis, which we talked about Scilla and Calabria, but scholars actually place that episode from the Odyssey in the Strait of Messina. Right, because basically the ships are trying to pass through these two coasts and the waters could be very choppy and, in the Odyssey, it was like Charybdis was a whirlpool, right? So there was Sheila the monster that would attack you from above, and then Charybdis was like a whirlpool in the sea that would suck the ships down and create these shipwrecks. And the Strait of Messina, I mean, I'm not saying there are whirlpools per se, but like it can get quite rough and choppy, and especially, back then they were looking for some way to explain these natural phenomena, right? It's a monster, it's the gods, the winds, right? The winds that push you off course. Well, that's Aeolus. There's a specific god that's in charge of the winds. Circe was a goddess who was exiled to this island called, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but it's like Aiaia in the Odyssey. And that was supposedly her punishment for transforming Sheila, who was a nymph. Circe transformed her into a monster out of jealousy and then basically was exiled to this island as a punishment. And Odysseus ended up meeting both of them on his epic journey.
And there's stories that the sirens are a warning tale as well, and that's why we see them in the early depictions as birds, where sailors might hear the birds and think they're coming to land, but actually some of the places, like the one in Cilento in particular, is a place where your ship could get ruined because all of
Mhm.
a sudden the water is very shallow, though it doesn't appear so. So the sirens and the sort of warning to resist their call, their sweet call of land, is a story that maybe just comes from the local sailors and fishermen. And some of the greatest works of art and sites throughout the Mediterranean world have been known for a long time to either sailors or to shepherds who have
Yeah.
been keeping these places safeguarded in some ways, but have been aware of places that have just been unknown. And so I also like to think of the Odyssey as a collection of folk tales that were turned into something much more glamorous and adventurous.
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting way to think about it. I like that.
I also know I friendly with a boat captain in Cilento, in the southern part of Cilento around Palinuro. He tells me stories about how the local anchovy fishermen know exactly where there are all of these underwater sites, where there are troves of amphora, the
Mhm.
vessels that carried olive oil and wine around the Mediterranean, and probably sculptures as well. And some of them are sites that are known to the Italian government and are somewhat monitored or restricted, and others are just, kind of known by the local fishermen. So many of these sites still exist. I had a mythically bad migraine while I was recording with Laura, so I didn't end our conversation with a proper goodbye and summary of where you can find so much of the information for planning your own Southern Italian Odyssey. But if you visit danielleoterry.com, you will find it all in the show notes. And don't forget to also follow Laura at the New Roman Times on Substack. Now, all of my podcast episodes are free. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, I still encourage you to sign up for the free subscription so that you'll get an email about the podcasts as soon as they come out, along with all of the show notes. A paid subscription is where you get access to the monthly Q&As with me, as well as the destination deep dives, which are rich with information that you need for planning a trip. Now, here's the thing about Instagram and TikTok. It's very hard, almost impossible to get traction on these platforms unless you are profiling the most famous places and then tagging hotels that have a gazillion followers already. Okay, I just did an amazing deep dive about Ischia. I got 23 likes on it on Instagram. It's a shame. But Substack, this is the place where people can really go deep. So, if you want the really good stuff, not the algorithm patronized stuff, a paid subscription really goes a long way. Now, this may surprise you, but very few of my paid subscribers are actively planning a trip. Most people are just coming for the history, to join the Q&A and hang out. The stories, maybe they're dreaming about a past trip to Italy or planning a future one that doesn't really have a firm date on it yet. This community is not really about trip planning, though it is, but it's about telling stories that help you better understand the past, which will hopefully help all of us better understand the future. So thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your wealth of knowledge. I hope to see you in Rome in a couple of weeks. And for everyone else, thank you so much for listening.